In tonight's episode, we're diving into three of the strangest and most chilling mysteries across Asia, hauntings that refuse to fade, places where silence feels heavier than sound, and stories that still leave locals whispering. One of them takes us deep into the desert of Rajasthan, India, where an entire village vanished into the night and left behind only ruins, curses, and shadows. This is not a ghost of a single wandering figure. This is something bigger, something that swallowed hundreds of lives at once and left the land itself scarred. Imagine walking through a place where every house still stands, every street still lines up perfectly, yet not a single soul has lived there for more than 2 centuries. The walls crumble, the wells dry, but the silence never dies. Tonight, we step into Kuldhara, the vanished village. Some say its people fled from tyranny, others believe they carried out a curse so powerful that the earth itself rejected any who tried to return. Archaeologists point to drought, famine, or heavy taxes. But locals? They speak of shadows slipping through broken windows, of whispers that chase travelers after sunset, and of accidents that befall anyone foolish enough to stay too long. So why did Kuldhara fall silent? And what remains there now? Let's find out. Orang's tale shows us a spirit who refused to vanish until her voice was heard, a ghost who demanded justice in a world too eager to look away. But not every haunting clings to a single figure. Some tragedies are so vast, so consuming, that they leave behind an emptiness where life itself once thrived. In the deserts of Rajasthan, India, lies a place where silence became the loudest ghost of all. A village once full of families, markets, and prayers, suddenly abandoned, left to crumble beneath the desert. Sunday, no spirit appears in white, no voice calls out in rage, yet the weight of its curse lingers. This is the story of Kuldhara, the vanished village, where an entire community disappeared into the night and left behind only whispers, shadows, and a mystery that refuses to die. The desert of Rajasthan has always carried its own kind of silence. By day, the wind sweeps hot and dry across the dunes, rattling the thorn trees and grinding sand into the cracks of old stone. By night, the air cools but grows heavier, as if the land itself remembers too much. It is here, not far from Jaisalmer, that the ruins of Kuldhara lie waiting. For tourists, Kuldhara is a curiosity, a forgotten skeleton of a village. Rows of crumbling stone houses stretch across the earth, their roofs long gone, their walls fractured by centuries of sun and wind. The streets are empty, but they still form neat lines, as though the villagers had stepped out only yesterday. And yet, for 200 years, no one has lived here. Our story begins with Anaya, a university student from Delhi, who came to Rajasthan with a group of friends. She was studying history, fascinated by folklore and the way stories linger in places long after the people are gone. When she heard about Kuldhara, a village said to be cursed, she insisted they make the trip. To her, it was more than a tourist stop. It was a chance to walk inside a legend. The driver who brought them from Jaisalmer was less enthusiastic. His hands tightened on the wheel when Anaya mentioned their destination. He muttered under his breath, saying they could visit the fort instead, or the lakes, or even the desert camps, but not Kuldhara. When pressed, he only shook his head. That place, people leave, but they are never truly gone. The warning only made Anaya more curious. By the time they reached the outskirts, the sun was dipping low, staining the desert in shades of red and gold. The ruins emerged like broken teeth from the sand, silent and waiting. A crumbling arch marked the entrance, the kind of structure that once must have welcomed merchants, travelers, and neighbors. Now it stood jagged, half swallowed by sand. Anaya stepped through it, her sandals crunching against the earth. The air inside the village was different, cooler, somehow heavier. Her friends joked to each other, taking pictures among the stones, but she felt the weight immediately. The houses seemed to watch them, the broken windows like hollow eyes. As they wandered deeper, Anaya noticed how uniform everything was. Each house had the same basic shape, the same stone courtyards, the same narrow streets connecting them. It should have felt ordinary, but instead the repetition pressed against her nerves. It was as if the village had been frozen mid-breath, abandoned in a single moment, all its people vanishing at once. She remembered the story. The minister Salim Singh, a man of power and cruelty, who demanded a girl of Kuldhara for himself. When the villagers refused, they did not fight, they did not argue, they simply left. Every family, every child, every elder. They vanished overnight, carrying what they could, leaving the rest behind. Before leaving, they cursed the land. No one would ever live here again. The official histories offered other explanations. Drought, famine, taxes too heavy to bear. But as Anaya traced her fingers along the ridges of the stone walls, she found herself wondering, could desperation alone leave behind this kind of silence? Or was there something more, something that clung to the earth and seeped into every abandoned house? The group reached the central street, where the ruins of a temple still stood. Its carved pillars were worn but not erased, its steps cracked but steady. Anaya lingered at the entrance while her friends laughed and posed for photos. She knelt, brushing sand from one of the stones, and felt the sharp prickle of unease. The desert was quiet, too quiet. Even the wind had stopped. She looked up, scanning the rooftops. For a moment, she thought she saw movement. A shadow darting between the walls, quick and sharp, as though someone was watching them. She blinked, and it was gone. Her heart skipped, and she told herself it was nothing, just the trick of light and nerves. But the feeling did not leave. When one of her friends suggested they explore after sunset, Anaya hesitated. She wanted to believe the stories were only legend, that curses belonged to another age. Yet the air around her felt too heavy, as though the village itself was holding its breath, waiting for nightfall. She glanced again at the broken houses, at the silent streets, and for the first time, she wondered if the villagers had not abandoned Kuldhara at all. Maybe they had never left. The sun slipped lower across the horizon, washing the ruins of Kuldhara in hues of copper and crimson. The shadows of the broken walls stretched long across the sand, and the once playful chatter of Anaya's friends began to taper off. Even the loudest of them, Raj, who had spent most of the afternoon cracking jokes, grew quieter as the air shifted. The silence of the desert was no longer peaceful, it was watchful. Anaya trailed her fingers along the edge of a collapsed wall, studying the patterns etched into the stone. The carvings were faint, almost erased by centuries of sand and wind, but she could just make out shapes of flowers, prayers, fragments of something once sacred. A thought struck her. If the villagers left in such haste, why had they taken the time to carve their walls so carefully? It was as though they never expected to abandon the place. A sharp cry cut her thoughts. Mira, the youngest of the group, had stumbled backward, pointing toward one of the doorways. "Someone's inside," she whispered, her face pale. The others rushed over, crowding around her. Anaya's heart quickened as she peered into the doorway. The stone house yawned dark and empty, only shadows within. Raj laughed nervously. "Probably a goat," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Or maybe you just scared yourself." Mira shook her head firmly. "No, I saw someone. A woman. She was standing right there." The group exchanged uneasy glances. They had seen no one since entering Kuldhara. The village was supposed to be deserted. Anaya felt a chill ripple through her. "Describe her," she urged. Mira swallowed. She wore a veil, white. But her face, she stopped, shivering. "I couldn't see it. It was just empty." For a long moment, no one spoke. The desert wind picked up again, whistling low through the broken archways, as if mocking their silence. Raj clapped his hands together suddenly. All right, enough. This is what happens when you believe ghost stories. It's an abandoned village. Shadows play tricks. He stepped boldly into the doorway, his shoulders squared. See? Nothing here but dust. But as his voice echoed through the hollow room, Anaya noticed something strange. The echo was wrong. It lingered too long, stretching unnaturally, as though bouncing off walls much deeper than the small chamber allowed. Raj faltered mid-sentence, his eyes darting around. Weird acoustics, he muttered, but his face had lost its color. The group moved on, but unease followed close behind. The streets felt narrower, the air colder. Each crunch of their footsteps seemed too loud, too intrusive, as if they were being heard by someone unseen. Anaya tried to keep her breathing steady, reminding herself of the rational explanations: wind, shadows, nerves. Yet, when she turned her head, she caught sight of something that made her stop cold. A line of footprints in the sand. They were small, bare, leading away from the temple toward one of the ruined alleys. But here was the strangest part. They were fresh. The edges were sharp, not yet softened by the shifting desert wind. Someone or something had walked here moments ago. Look, Anaya whispered, pointing. The group fell silent as their eyes followed the trail. Raj crouched, running his fingers over the marks. Not ours, he said quickly. We've all been wearing shoes. His voice cracked, betraying the fear he was trying to hide. Mira's eyes widened. So she was real. The trail led them deeper into the heart of Kuldhara, where the houses leaned inward, pressing their shadows against one another like conspirators. The footprints ended at a narrow doorway. The group hesitated, their courage thinning. Then Anaya, driven by a mix of curiosity and dread, stepped forward. She pushed on the weathered doorframe, and it creaked open with a groan that echoed through the empty street. Inside, the room was barren. Only sand and broken stone filled the space. But as they entered, the temperature dropped sharply. Anaya hugged her arms to her chest, shivering despite the desert heat outside. The air smelled faintly of smoke, as though a fire had been extinguished only moments before. Mira gasped suddenly, pointing to the far wall. There, do you see it? Anaya turned. Etched faintly into the stone was a handprint, dark, smeared, larger than any of theirs. She stepped closer, her stomach knotting. The print was old, the edges blurred, but when she brushed her fingers against it, the stone felt damp. Raj backed away quickly. All right, that's enough exploring. We should go. Sun's almost down. But Anaya couldn't shake the question clawing at her mind. If the villagers had all left, if no one had lived here for 2 centuries, then why were there fresh footprints in the sand? Why did the walls feel damp with marks no time should preserve? The legends said the Paliwals cursed Kuldhara, that no one could ever live here again. But as the last rays of sun bled out across the horizon, Anaya began to wonder if the curse was never about keeping people out. Maybe it was about making sure the ones who left never truly escaped. The last light of day drained quickly, leaving Kuldhara cloaked in shadow. The desert that had felt wide and open only hours before now pressed in on every side. The broken houses loomed taller, their jagged edges casting shapes that looked too much like people waiting in silence. Anaya and her friends clustered close together, their earlier bravado slipping away with the sundial. Raj was the first to break the uneasy silence. "We've seen enough," he said sharply, shoving his hands in his pockets. "Let's head back before it gets completely dark." His voice was loud, almost aggressive, but Anaya could hear the tremor beneath it. Mira shook her head. "What about the footprints? The handprint? We can't just pretend we didn't see those things." Raj's jaw tightened. "They mean nothing. Old marks, tricks of the sand, that's all." But as if to defy him, a low sound drifted through the empty streets. It was faint, like the scrape of metal against stone, coming from deeper within the ruins. Everyone froze. Anaya's pulse quickened. "Did you hear that?" The sound came again, louder this time, dragging, scraping, steady. Not wind, not an animal, something deliberate. Raj swore under his breath. "Probably another tourist. Someone trying to scare us." "No," Anaya whispered, straining her ears. "Listen, it's inside the village. Moving." The group followed the noise cautiously, their footsteps echoing too loudly on the sand. The sound led them to one of the larger houses, its roof half collapsed, its doorway gaping like a mouth. The scraping stopped the moment they approached. The silence that followed was thicker than before. Mira clutched Anaya's arm. "I don't like this. Something's wrong here." Before Anaya could answer, Raj stepped forward, his pride outweighing his fear. "I'll prove it's nothing." He pushed through the doorway. Inside, his flashlight beam cut across empty walls and broken stone. But then it froze on something strange. A pot sat upright in the corner, not shattered like the others they had seen, but whole, dustless, as though it had just been placed there. Raj frowned, his bravado slipping. "This shouldn't be here." Anaya joined him, her stomach tightening. The pot was filled with sand, but pressed into its surface were marks, symbols scratched deep. They weren't decorative, but crude, sharp lines that spiraled in patterns that made no sense. When she leaned closer, she felt heat rising from the sand, unnatural in the cool night air. Suddenly, the pot cracked. A sharp fissure split its side, releasing a hiss of air that smelled of sulfur. Mira screamed, stumbling back. Raj dropped the flashlight, the beam spinning wildly across the floor. The group scrambled out of the house, gasping for breath. Outside, the wind had risen, sweeping through the streets with a low howl. The sand kicked up around them, stinging their skin, and for a moment Anaya thought she saw shapes moving within the storm. Figures, dozens of them, walking silently between the houses. "We need to leave," Mira pleaded. Raj shook his head stubbornly. "No. Someone planted that pot to scare us. Locals, maybe. It's all a trick." But Anaya wasn't so sure. The village was supposed to be empty. Who would live here? Who would carve symbols and leave them burning in the sand? She thought of the curse, of the villagers who vowed no one would ever dwell here again. Perhaps the warning was never meant for outsiders, but for themselves, those who had been forced to flee. They hurried toward the main street, but the storm grew thicker, the sand swallowing their path. It was then that they saw her, a woman standing at the far end of the road. She wore a veil, white against the dark, her figure still and solid amid the swirling dust. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, as they blinked, she vanished. Mira sobbed. Raj cursed under his breath, but his voice shook. Anaya stood frozen, her chest tight. It was the same figure Mira had described earlier, the same faceless presence in the doorway. And then came the whisper. It was soft at first, almost carried by the wind, but soon it grew louder, curling through the ruins. "Leave this place. Leave before you cannot." The words chilled Anaya to her bones. They weren't mocking. They were pleading. A warning, spoken with the weight of centuries. The friends stood in stunned silence, the sandstorm still raging around them. For the first time since entering Kuldhara, Raj had no argument. His bravado cracked, his eyes wide with fear. Anaya's mind spun. Were they being threatened? Protected? Was the voice the echo of the villagers themselves, warning all who stepped where they should not? The answer did not matter now. One thing was certain, the longer they stayed, the more the village seemed to wake. And whatever had cursed Kuldhara, it was not finished with them yet. The sandstorm rose until the entire village seemed swallowed by it. The air turned thick, stinging their faces, forcing the group to huddle together in the narrow street. Visibility shrank to only a few feet. the broken houses blurring into jagged shadows. Anaya tried to steady her breathing, but every sound seemed amplified. The howling wind, the scraping of grit against stone, and somewhere beneath it all, faint footsteps that did not belong to them. Raj shouted over the storm, his voice raw. "This is madness! We have to find the arch and get out!" But when Anaya turned, her stomach dropped. The arch was gone. The path they had entered through, the way back to the road, was swallowed by shifting sand and endless rows of ruined houses. It was as if the village had twisted in on itself, trapping them inside. Mira clutched Anaya's arm, her nails digging into skin. "It doesn't want us to leave." The words echoed in Anaya's chest. The legends said, no one could live in Kuldhara again, but they had never said anything about leaving. The footsteps came again, clearer this time, crunching softly against the sand. Slow, measured, deliberate. Anaya spun, her flashlight beam cutting across the storm, and there she saw them, figures moving between the ruins, dozens of them. Some tall, some small, their outlines blurred but unmistakably human. They walked with the slow rhythm of a funeral procession, their heads bowed, their arms hanging limp at their sides. Raj swore violently, his bravado finally shattered. No, 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 this isn't real. He staggered back, tripping over a loose stone. One of the figures turned its head, Anaya's breath caught. Though the veil of dust obscured most of its features, she glimpsed the hollow sockets where eyes should have been, the jagged line of a mouth frozen half open. And then, just as quickly, it was gone, swallowed again by the storm. The group broke into a run, stumbling through the ruins in blind panic. But no matter which direction they chose, the streets twisted, leading them deeper into the heart of the village. The houses leaned closer, their walls cracked and looming, their empty doorways gaping like mouths. The storm howled louder, yet beneath it Anaya swore she could hear voices, faint, layered, as though hundreds of throats whispered in unison. She pressed her hands to her ears, but the voices only grew clearer. "We left, we left, we left." The chant rose and fell with the rhythm of the wind. Suddenly, the storm stilled. The sand dropped abruptly, leaving the air sharp and cold. The silence that followed was worse than the howling had been, and in that silence, Anaya realized they were no longer alone. At the center of the street stood a single figure. The same veiled woman Mira had seen. The same shape Anaya had glimpsed at the edge of her vision. She stood perfectly still, her white veil glowing faintly in the moonlight that managed to pierce through the storm clouds. Raj tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "Who are you?" The woman lifted her head slowly. Beneath the veil, her face was blank. Not scarred, not hidden, blank, like unfinished clay. Anaya's stomach churned. She remembered the legend of the villagers fleeing into the night. What if they had not fled at all? What if the curse had taken them, stripped them of identity, bound them here forever? The woman raised her hand, pointing at them with a gesture that felt both accusatory and pleading. And then the whispers rose again, louder, pressing into their ears. "Leave, leave before you cannot." Anaya stumbled forward, her throat tight. "Why are you warning us? What happens if we stay?" The whispers ceased. The woman lowered her hand, and slowly she lifted her veil. Mira screamed. Raj turned away, his knees buckling. Anaya forced herself to look, and what she saw made her chest seize. Beneath the veil was no face at all, just a void, a hollow darkness that pulled at her vision, pulling her forward, threatening to swallow her whole. She tore her gaze away with a gasp, stumbling back. The woman's voice finally came, low and hollow, reverberating through the ruins. "We never left. We are bound to this place. And those who see us belong to us. The words pierced through Anaya like ice. She understood now. The villagers had cursed Kuldhara not simply to keep outsiders away. They had bound themselves to the land, their souls fused to stone and sand, their exile eternal. And anyone who lingered too long risked becoming part of them. Another faceless figure walking the ruins forever. The woman stepped closer. The ground trembled beneath her, the walls groaning as if the entire village leaned inward. Shadows gathered at the edges of the street, forming more figures, more hollow shapes, all drifting silently toward them. Anaya's breath came in ragged gasps. Her mind screamed at her to run, but her body felt frozen, as though invisible hands clutched her ankles. Around her, her friends sobbed and cursed, trapped in the same paralysis. And then the voice came again, layered with hundreds more, echoing from every wall, every broken house, every grain of sand. Leave now, or stay forever. It was no longer a warning, it was a sentence. The line between safety and damnation had thinned to almost nothing, and Anaya realized with horror that the curse of Kuldhara was not a myth at all. It was alive. And it was choosing them. The silence after the warning was suffocating. The storm had stilled, but the air was no calmer. If anything, it felt heavier, pressing against Anaya's chest, making every breath a battle. The figures still surrounded them, faceless and silent, but they no longer moved forward. They lingered at the edges of the street, like a congregation waiting for something to be decided. Anaya's flashlight flickered, then died, plunging them into dim moonlight. She clutched it uselessly, her heart pounding, and forced herself to speak. "Why us? Why are you showing yourselves to us?" The veiled woman tilted her head, and when she spoke again, her voice was not a whisper but a hollow chorus, the sound of many layered together. "Because you see, because you hear." The others came, laughed, turned away. They never listened. Anaya felt her throat tighten. The tourists who had visited Kuldhara before them, none of them had stayed this long. None had pressed so deep into the ruins. Maybe that was why the curse had unfolded now. Raj, trembling, forced his voice out. We didn't do anything. We're just visitors." The faceless woman turned toward him. Her veil shifted slightly, and the void beneath it pulsed, pulling at the light. Raj stumbled back with a strangled cry. "You walked our streets," the voice thundered. "You touched our walls. You asked what happened here, so we show you." Anaya's stomach twisted. This wasn't random haunting. It was deliberate. The curse wasn't just a threat. It was a memory that forced itself upon those who lingered, demanding to be witnessed. She took a step forward, though her legs shook violently. "Then tell us, what really happened the night you left?" The figures stirred, their heads tilting in unison. For a long moment, the only sound was the low whistle of the desert wind. And then the vision came. It wasn't like before. This time the air thickened, shimmering with heat, and suddenly Anaya wasn't standing in ruins anymore. The houses rose around her whole and solid, their walls smooth, their courtyards lit with lanterns. Voices filled the air, children laughing, vendors calling, the bustle of life in a thriving village. Her friends gasped beside her. They saw it too. But the scene shifted quickly. Shouts, panic, doors slamming shut, women hurrying children inside, men gathering with grim faces. At the far end of the street, riders approached, soldiers with torches, led by a man in ornate robes. His eyes glowed with greed as he called out, a single demand: the girl. Anaya's chest constricted. She remembered the legend, the minister Salim Singh, who demanded to take a girl from Kuldhara for himself. Now she was watching the moment it unfolded. The vision blurred. The villagers gathered in the temple, voices raised in despair. "We cannot fight him," one cried. "If we resist, he will destroy us all." Another voice, weary but strong, answered, "Then we must leave. All of us. Tonight." Anaya's pulse hammered. She saw them packing hurriedly, families clutching bundles, children carried in their mother's arms. The whole village moved like a single body, silent but determined. And before they left, the elders gathered in a circle, pouring sand into their hands, chanting words that made the air hum with power. A curse, a binding, their final act. The vision snapped back. The ruins loomed around them once more, broken and hollow, but the faceless figures still watched. Anaya's voice cracked. "You didn't vanish. You bound yourselves here." The woman's head tilted. To protect her. To protect all. If he could not have one, he would have none. We left, but we never left. The revelation cut through Anaya like ice. The curse had not been vengeance, it had been sacrifice. The villagers had doomed themselves to eternal exile, tethered to the ruins, so that no one could ever claim them again. Their honor had survived, but their souls had never escaped. Mira's face was streaked with tears. That's why no one can live here. Because it isn't empty. It's still theirs. The woman lifted her hand once more, pointing not in accusation now, but in warning. You must go, before the sand remembers your names. Anaya felt her chest tighten. She thought of the footprints, the handprint in the house, the voices in the storm. Each had been a fragment of the village's memory, seeping into the present. The longer they stayed, the more the curse wrapped around them. Raj shook his head wildly. "No, we can't just leave like this. There has to be a way to free them." But the faceless woman's voice dropped to a whisper, final and sharp. "Not all cages can be broken. Some are chosen." The figures began to fade, dissolving back into shadow, their outlines blurring until only the ruined walls remained. The air lightened, the pressure easing from Anaya's chest, but the warning clung to her bones. They had wanted answers, and they had been given them. The curse was not myth, not rumor, it was truth, born of desperation, sealed with sacrifice. Kuldhara had never been abandoned. Its people were still there, trapped forever in the bones of their village. And now Anaya and her friends knew too much. The curse had let them glimpse its secret, but secrets demanded a price. The air in Kuldhara grew still again, the storm fading as though it had never been. The houses stood silent, broken and hollow, yet Anaya no longer saw them as ruins. She saw them as prisons, every cracked wall and shadowed corner holding fragments of lives that had never truly left. The warning still rang in her ears. Before the sand remembers your names. Her friends didn't wait for another sign. Raj grabbed Mira by the wrist, urging her toward the direction they thought the arch should be. Their footsteps echoed sharply in the dead village, every sound bouncing back too loud, as though the stones themselves were listening. Anaya followed, but something inside her twisted. She wanted to look back, to see if the faceless woman still lingered, if the procession of villagers watched them depart. But her body refused, her instinct screaming that to look was to stay. The arch appeared at last, dim in the moonlight, rising out of the dunes like a broken gate. Relief surged through them, and they stumbled forward, their breaths harsh, their clothes heavy with sand. As they crossed beneath the arch, the air seemed to shift. The heaviness lifted, and the night sounds of the desert returned. Crickets, the sigh of wind, the faint cry of a jackal in the distance. They were out. No one spoke during the ride back to Jaisalmer. The driver glanced at their pale faces in the rearview mirror, but said nothing. It was only when the lights of the city finally came into view that Mira broke the silence, her voice a fragile whisper. "Do you think they'll ever be free?" No one answered. Later that night, lying awake in her hotel room, Anaya replayed the final vision in her mind. The villagers gathering in the temple. the curse cast in desperation. The faceless woman's last warning. She tried to convince herself it had been imagination, a shared trick of nerves and fear. But when she shook the sand from her shoes, she froze. There, pressed clearly into the grains, was a footprint, small, bare, and perfectly formed. Her breath caught. None of them had walked barefoot. She dumped the sand out quickly, her hands shaking, but the mark had already burned itself into her memory. Kuldhara had let them leave. But as Anaya stared at the empty floor, she couldn't escape the terrible thought that followed. What if part of the village had come with them? Let's walk into something colder, concrete that sweats even in winter, corridors that keep their own time, a place where goodbyes were signed on clipboards instead of headstones. From Kuldhara's empty streets, we moved to the fog-choked hills outside Gwangju, South Korea, where an abandoned psychiatric hospital sits with every door still facing inward. The official records say it closed overnight. The locals say the building never learned how to sleep. If you stand at the front gate after dark, every wall clock inside is stuck on the same second, and if you hear your name called from an empty room, you must not answer, not even to yourself. Tonight, we enter Gonjiam. The first time Yuna heard her name inside the hospital, it wasn't with her ears. It came through her headphones, clean, close, unmistakable, while her recorder's input meter sat flat. Yuna, the voice breathed, not through the air but along the cable itself, as if the sound had chosen the shortest path to her skull. She flinched and pulled the cans off. The corridor ahead was empty, the wallpaper peeling like curled fish scales, a steel gurney stranded mid-journey. Her companion Daeong lifted his flashlight past her shoulder, the beam trembling just enough to betray his nerves. "Did you hear?" "Nope," she lied, because saying yes felt like agreeing to something. Somewhere to their left, a door sighed shut on its own. Yuna wasn't a thrill chaser. She was here for work. She was 26, an audio engineer finishing a thesis on residual architecture, the way buildings keep sound after people are gone. She collected room tones the way birders collect first songs, carefully, reverently, aware that silence is never honest. When the conference in Seoul wrapped, she took a local bus to Gwangju and a rattling village shuttle toward the hills. She'd asked the fixer for an empty church or a disused school. He'd shrugged. "You want layers?" echoed Gonjiam. "If your courage is strong." The bus to the outskirts smelled of mandarin peel and damp wool. An older woman in a quilted vest stepped on and sat beside Yuna, a net bag of oranges cradled in her lap. "The hospital," she said, that particular Korean cadence making a sentence feel like both question and warning. "I just need room noise," Yuna said. 10 minutes. Don't let them say your name." The woman pressed a small orange into Yuna's palm. "And if you smell burning peel, leave without turning around." They disembarked in fog that tasted like river metal. The hospital rose ahead like a ship run aground, 3 stories of concrete, windows punched out, vines threading the frames. Someone had painted "No Entry" across the front steps in thick red strokes. Beyond the gate, the lawn had become a quilt of moss. In the hedges, white cloth strips had been tied to branches. They flicked and twisted like weak tongues. Daeyoung waited by the chain-link gate with a backpack of batteries and bravado. He ran a small urban exploration channel and was delighted a sound pro wanted to tag along. "You'll be the science," he said. "I'll be the idiot with the flashlight." A retired security guard sat in a tiny booth with the heater on and the door open. He checked their permits and then their faces. "Back before sunset," he said. "No live stream, no Ouija. And if you hear anyone calling from upstairs, ignore it, even if it sounds like your mother." "People prank?" Daeyoung asked. The guard looked past him at the black windows. "People," he said, "don't come here after dark." Inside the gate, Yuna clipped foam windscreens on her mics and ran through her checklist. Signal thump, check. Phantom power, Check. She watched the waveform spike and settle. The hospital, from here, presented a few simple truths: open doors, black mouths, ceilings damp in a way that suggested breath. She hit record, and the red light bloomed. The lobby creaked like a ship, even in still air. On the reception desk, a glass jar held a clutch of paper name tags curled from damp. Most were blank. A few bore smudges where a name had once been and had been rubbed away with a thumb. Beside the jar lay stainless steel triangles, scrapers an orderly might use to clear stubborn things from tile. "Look," De-Jong said, filming. "Fans say all the clocks stop at 3:33. He panned to a broken wall clock, indeed frozen at that absurd minute. "See? The dead hour. Probably nothing. Or not." Una laid her headphones over her ears. Room tone. A low hum. The faint weep of wind under a door. The pulse of a building too old to be empty. Then, a thin tap. She raised a hand for quiet. Tap. Tap. Not random. She traced it to the half-shut drawer under the desk. Inside lay a brass service bell. No hand touched it. The clapper struck the side again, once, twice, clear as silver. "Draft?" De-Jong said, too loud. Una slid the recorder closer. The bell's ring didn't register as much as she expected. Instead, the wave spiked at something under its pitch. A soft consonant and a breath. The shape of a mouth, forming the beginning of a name. They moved on. The corridor towards C smelled of old paint and damp straps. A bulletin board still held laminated notices: hydrotherapy suspended, family visiting hours, please return all keys. In a nurse's station, a ledger lay open to an unfinished line, admitted 3:33, patient. The pen stroke ended mid-swipe. "Why leave so fast?" De-Jong muttered. "Fire drill that never ended?" Una tuned the room with her body, tilting her head, feeling where sound thickened. In one corner, the air felt syrupy, like walking through low waves. She placed a boundary mic at shoulder height. The headphones warmed her ears. Quiet unfurled in a long band. Beneath it, a new sound. The push and pull of a slow breath, granular, as if passing through a mouth full of ash. "Una," said the wire. She took the headphones off slowly, as if her head were full of bees. "We should keep moving," she said. "I don't want to be here when the light drops." "Scared?" De-Jong teased, but his camera hand trembled. "Cautious," she said. "They're cousins." They found the hydrotherapy wing by following broken tiles and the smell of old bleach. The tubs were concrete coffins with taps like chrome knuckles. A brittle sign read, "No unauthorized immersions." Rat nests tufted the drains. In one basin, a single strand of black hair adhered to the lip and pointed down like a compass needle stuck between letters. Una pressed a contact mic to the tile. At first, only the memory of water. Then a drip, deliberate and wrong, steady like a metronome taught a human heart and failing it. No plumbing in a building without water should keep time. Her fingers came away cold enough to ache. From somewhere deeper, a radio crackled, the once familiar sound of a place at work. A voice fizzed, male, female, undecided, saying something that might have been a room number or a prayer. The syllables popped and died. Then, clear through the rotten ceiling, a second voice. De-Jong. He jerked so hard the flashlight beam bucked. "Who said that?" "Don't," Una said. "Don't what?" "Don't answer." He swallowed and nodded. They retreated into a ward lined with doors, numbers peeled from frames. 11, 12, 13. Through the cracked window of 13, a restraint chair sat shackled to the floor, a strap across its arm like a tongue. Behind it, a single Hangul loop had been scratched into the plaster over and over until the wall gave up. It might have been na, I, or la, or just the desperate geometry of a hand that had been taught to write and was lied to about its own name. Footsteps pattered on the floor above, too many for two people, too light for men, too quick for one. Children? Shoes without weight? They stopped directly overhead. A small object rolled, circled, hit something hollow, and fell silent. Then incense. Not sandalwood, not temple smoke, citrus, bright and bitter, like orange peel held to a match. The scent bled into the corridor from the stairwell. The old woman's warning resurfaced intact. If you smell burning peel, leave without turning around. They didn't turn. They followed the scent and found its source on the landing. A man in a worker's jacket, grey hair plastered by sweat, pinching a smouldering stick between his fingers and passing the smoke in 3 slow circles before his face. He nodded once, as if expecting them. "Which of you brought the name tags?" he asked. "We didn't touch them," Dae-young said quickly. "Not those," the man pointed at Yuna's chest. She realized she had clipped a laminated slate to her lanyard. Name. Yuna, so security could call her for the permit. She unclipped it, as if it were hot. "Don't write your name inside," the man said. "Not even in chalk, not even once." "We'll leave now," Yuna said. "We just need—" "Leave without apologizing," he said, cutting her off. "Apology is agreement." Dae-young looked ready to bolt. Against every rule in her body, Yuna glanced down the corridor. At the far end, in the shadow of Ward C, someone stood perfectly still, head tilted, as if listening for a drop that never hit water. The figure was narrow, hospital thin, hair straight to the shoulder, a white patient gown stained to earth tones by time. When the flashlight licked the corner, the figure did not vanish or charge. It raised a hand and pointed at the recorder at Yuna's hip. "Don't," the man snapped. "How does it know what that is?" Dae-young whispered. "It doesn't," the man said. "But it knows hungry when it sees it." He led them into the nurse's station with the ledger and set the incense in a chipped mug. Smoke rose straight as a chalk line. "What's your major?" he asked Yuna, like a bored uncle making conversation. "Audio." The word felt small. "I'm not here for—" She gestured at the things that don't fit in reports. "You are here for names," he said. "Buildings keep them. They're sticky. You came to listen for what the walls remember. Good. But in this place, the remembering is mutual." He lit a second stick, the peel scent sharpened, pithy and chemical. He traced a circle in the air just above the linoleum, a gesture that left no mark but still drew a ring in the mind. "Stand here," he said. "Both of you. Phones off. They like new batteries." "Who are you?" Dae-young asked, his voice missing half its edges. "Someone who lives close enough to hear when the building coughs," the man said. "Someone who had a sister here. Someone who knows when to leave fruit and when to leave people alone." "What happened when it closed?" Yuna asked. "Really, it didn't close," he said. "It was paused." They stacked the clipboards. They wrote stop on the board. They pulled the keys. They left their names in here like tools. The place learned the trick. What trick? Calling back who it needs. He looked at the ledger's broken line. They admitted people into the building like ship manifests. The building learned admission. Now it admits. The footsteps above resumed and stopped at the top of the stair with the precision of a drill team. A childlike melody, not words, just cadence, sang 2 notes in the humorless rhythm of a heart monitor. The tune repeated once, twice, then broke into the sibilant curve of a name. "Dae-young," said the stair. He flinched toward the sound, then back into the invisible circle. "It's a trick," he said. "Yes," the man agreed. "And also not." "What happens if we answer?" Yuna asked. "Because better to ask than to learn the other way." "It writes you down," the man said. "Not the way you spell, the way you sound. Then it can call you when it's hungry or alone." The smell of wet fabric unfurled. The figure at the corridor's end arrived one step closer without crossing the space between. The rectangle near its collar where a chart would clip was empty. The empty hungered. Without meaning to, Yuna raised the recorder. The figure's head tipped in a motion that might have been a sob if there'd been enough body to carry sound. In Yuna's head, headphones or not, a gentle voice formed the first syllable of her name. You. Stop, the man said, the word cutting through the room like a belt lash. He pinched out the incense. Smoke died. The slice in the air sealed. He turned his face toward the corridor and addressed the empty clip on the gown as if it were a person. Not this one, he said, polite as a son to an ancestor. For a beat the hospital hesitated. Then the temperature dropped as if the building opened its mouth to a winter river. Doors down the hall thudded one by one, closing with a rhythm that matched a heart at a sprint. On the ledger, the blank line where a name might go darkened, as if ink bled through from a page that didn't exist. Move, the man said, not unkindly. They moved. The exit route had shifted in the way abandoned spaces do when you rely on memory instead of chalk. A corridor that had led to the lobby now dead, ended against a service elevator door welded shut. A wall that had held a window now presented only its frame. The man walked as if downhill through a crowd, shoulders square, never turning his head when the building tried to introduce a voice from a room they hadn't entered. What do we do with the names? Yuna asked, less to fill air than to keep her mouth from forming anything the building might recognize as an answer. You keep them for who they belong to, he said. You don't put them on jars, or in videos, or on ledgers you don't intend to finish. So when people come to film, they make lists, he said, and the lists keep them. Then the house has visitors even when the doors are shut. You said you had a sister, Yuna said softly, because some questions are keys and some are knives, and this one could be both. Room 11, he said. She used to sing radio jingles when we visited. After the closure, my mother heard her voice through our boiler room. The tune was wrong without the radio. She called my name. I didn't answer. I brought oranges. I burned peel. Now I sweep the steps when the fog is low and tell people not to leave their names dangling. They pass the reception desk again. Condensation filmed the inside of the name tag jar as if someone had breathed into it and closed the lid. Through the glass, a line had appeared on one blank tag, faint and precise as a thread. Yuna didn't look closer. She didn't want to see her first syllable forming there like frost. At the front door, the man turned. When you go, he said, don't think the word home too hard. Think outside, even in your head. Thank you, Yuna said, because she could not leave a space where a promise might grow without a word to keep it from sprouting. He inclined his head, halfway between acceptance and apology. Eat the orange the Ajumma gave you on the way down, he said. Throw the peel in the ditch. Don't carry it across a threshold. They stepped into fog so sudden it felt manufactured. The lawn seemed to drink light. The white ribbons in the hedges all pointed one direction, as if an invisible wind had brushed them with a single hand. The security guard stood outside his booth, smoking like a man who knew exactly how many cigarettes a night could justify. He looked at their faces, at their hands, at the quick way Yuna slid the name slate into her pocket with the care of someone handling a live coal. Back before sunset, he said, though the sky already wore the color of old coins. Good. On the road down, when the fog thinned to fabric instead of wall, Yuna rolled the orange in her palm. The peel released oil. The smell cut the hospital out of her lungs for a second. She tore the skin off in a single spiral, then broke it deliberately, tossed the peel into the ditch, and ate the fruit fast, not because she wanted it, but because the man had told her to put this shape into her mouth instead of her name. At the bus stop, Dae-young kept fiddling with his camera. Card's fine, he said. Playback's weird. Weird how? Like the empty parts aren't empty. He tried a laugh and gagged on it. I'll cut something respectful. Just architecture. The village shuttle exhaled them into plastic seats. The Ajuma in the quilted vest sat behind them and said nothing. Between orchards and apartment blocks, Yuna dozed, not sure when her body had decided it was safe to loosen its grip on the thread. She woke to the soft bump of her bag against the aisle. The recorder had worked its way up from its pocket and lay face up as if someone had set it there to make a point. The red light wasn't on. Even so, the screen read, "Admitted 3:33, patient." The line where a name would go was a deliberate blank. She pressed the power button and got nothing. Dead battery. She hadn't turned it on since the stairs. She put it back in the bag with the care you use to slide a photograph into a book you don't intend to open again. That night, in her soul sublet, she set the bag on the floor and didn't touch it. She showered with the bathroom door open and the exhaust fan off so she could hear if the building changed its mind about holding still. The mirror fogged. In the steam, she almost wrote her name out of habit and stopped with the stroke of the first syllable curving into a nothing that could be Dien or a circle. She wiped the glass with her forearm and left it streaked. The apartment breathed as apartments do. A joke in the pipes, a neighbor's chair, the heat knocking. At 3:33 a.m., someone in the building across the alley dropped a pot lid. The sound crossed the air and arrived as if pushed on a trolley. She kept still. She let it pass. In the morning, a strip of glossy paper lay under her door, a takeout menu. She nudged it into the light with her toes. On the blank back, someone had drawn a rectangle in pen and left it empty. Above it, careful block letters read, "Name." Nothing followed. Beneath, smaller, ink pressing a little too hard, someone had written, "Do not answer if they call you." She folded the paper along the rectangle with her thumbnail and slid it under the leg of a wobbly table. She put the recorder in the freezer because ridiculous rituals are also rituals and watched frost feather across the screen until the numbers disappeared. When the frost melted hours later, the screen stayed black. Maybe broken, maybe waiting. Sometimes those are the same. On her way out to class, she took the staircase instead of the elevator, past the boiler room she had never noticed, and kept her eyes off any name that wasn't hers. On the landing, a child hummed 2 notes of a monitor's song with the timing wrong and then laughed, delighted by the wrongness. She walked as if downhill through a crowd, shoulders square, not answering even when the hum threaded itself into the beginning of her first syllable, not because she didn't hear it, but because she'd learned what answering meant. Outside, the city added its mercy, buses, crosswalks, the human gospel of traffic. Yuna let the noise cover her like a blanket warmed by strangers. In it, if she listened too closely, were shapes a recorder might call artifacts: citrus pith, a wet gown, a ledger line she would not finish. When she reached the university gate, someone behind her said gently, conversationally, "Yuna?" in a voice that could have been a classmate's. She didn't turn. She kept walking. Later, she dumped her bag on the studio table and unzipped it just enough to look at the recorder tucked inside. The screen stayed dark. As she reached to zip the bag, a grit rasped under her wrist. She brushed it off and stared. It was not dust from a desert. It was something finer, like paper chewed to paste and dried again, white, flaking. The texture of old tags rubbed blank by a thumb. She rolled one flake between finger and thumb until it dissolved. That night, sleep took her by layers. In the shallowest one, a bell rang twice. In the next, a ledger page turned. In the deepest, a woman in a plain cotton gown looked up from an empty chart and opened her mouth. No sound came out. A pen, somewhere, finished a line. Her eyes followed Yuna like a question without a question mark. At 3:33 a.m. Yuna woke to her phone face-up on the nightstand, a voice memo app open to a 3-second file she hadn't created. She didn't play it then. She stared at the ceiling and counted 60 breaths. Only after she watched the numbers on the digital clock become less offensive did she tap the file. Breath. A scrape. A whisper. Not language. Not tone, but the shape of a word mouthed twice, by different mouths. Outside. She got up, opened her apartment door, and set the orange peel she'd kept without meaning to on the hall's cold tile. The air smelled faintly and stubbornly of citrus, as if somebody had taught the building to burn fruit. She shut the door. The world on the other side kept breathing. She did not say her name.